government of former President Ibrahim Babangida. Now, how do we measure the contributions of Professor Nwosu to Nigeria's electoral growth and development? What would be the perfect recognition to honor him as he is laid to rest this Friday in Ajali, Orumba North local government area of Anambra State? We will hear from someone who was active in the labor movement in the peak of Nigeria's military era. This is the Eastern Eye. I am Alex Obodo. Welcome to the Eastern Eye here on Afia TV, a program that X-rays the political, social, and economic developments in Southeast Nigeria. Tonight, I am joined by Comrade Fidelis Ede, who is a former Vice President of NLC, Executive Director, Service Accord Initiative, and CEO of Comrade Farms Limited. Thank you so much, Ezudonobuaka, for joining me tonight on the Eastern Eye.
Thank you, my honor, for having me.
So, clearly, my first question is, it was quite a journey for Professor Humphrey Nwosu, and he was maybe quite at his peak. At the time, Nigeria was looking to have a democracy, and everyone thought that it would happen in 1993, but it didn't happen. But obviously, for Professor Humphrey Nwosu, the journey did not start in 1993, because it looks like a lot of people who now hear about Nwosu started hearing about him from 93. But the journey did not start in 1993 for Professor Humphrey Nwosu. Help us put this in perspective. You were active in the labor movement, and understanding that being in the labor movement means that you will have constant brushes with the military government. Help us paint a picture, especially from the late 80s to the mid-90s, or I should say early 90s.
Well, Alex, thank you. This is an honor to be invited to dip back again into history. I think one thing that we've lost is not keeping track as to the missteps we've had in the process of our nation building. When we talk about the electoral process, we must try to cast mind to the fact that it actually started in 1958. So, as at the time we were talking about 1989, when the Electoral Commission was reconstituted, we've had almost about 13 of such reconstituting. If you move further up to present day, we should be talking about 19. But the point is that how is it that the Nwosu's era remained just not iconic, but it's something even those who were not active participants will continue to join to make reference to. It was simple. First, you will recall that under IBB, we had more or less what was like a circuit electoral process that was unwinding, that Nigerians had to be engaged in. If you recall, the process of trying to even agree on the type of electoral regime that was to be allowed to bring in the kind of democratic method that should be allowed. You will recall the process of debating the nature of the multi-party Nigerians would accept, how politicians were banned and unbanned, and how finally IBB settled for the two-party system, and even got government to build secretariats for parties in every state of the Federation. It is this background that I want us to begin to situate the emergence of Nwosu. He came at a point, Babangida's military regime was in deficit of trust, was low in expectation, and Nigerians never believed that he will eventually allow a process that will lead to a democratic transition. So Nwosu, you will recall, had taken over from another erudite professor who also started a process he inherited. Professor Emawa was also his teacher. So it was a movement to building a viable electoral institution. When we talk about the annulment, and when we talk about what we missed, and try to just locate it within June 12 and Humphrey Nwosu, it means that we are not able to quantify or to even appreciate what we lost. First, the idea of bringing in option A4, when all hopes, all trust had been lost, was something that was unique. Mind you, like I pointed out, Nigerians have been taken through a rigorous, deceitful process, and politicians have been banned and unbanned. There was nothing the critical actors could do other than to feel helpless. But Nwosu's re-engineering of National Electoral Commission and the way he brought in the skill, the design, as a political scientist, I want to say he used INEC as a laboratory to test his political hypothesis. And you know, when we talk about June 12, we must also recall that elections have been conducted through that process in the local governments. We had elections conducted in the states and had concluded the National Assembly. So what was just left was the capping, which was the presidential election. So if you now look at what happened, we are just fixated on the presidential election, forgetting or not being able to appreciate that what was one opportunity Nigerians would have had to institute a credible electoral process. That was what we lost. It's not just about Nwosu. It was just that Nigerians lost an opportunity. You know, we usually will say we need a strong institution, not strong personalities. But you will discover also that strong institutions are built by men of courage, men who play by the rule, because it was not as if Nwosu did anything magical. No, for the first time, we had an umpire that decided to play by the rule. And that was one question he asked in the book he wrote about June 12, how Nigeria lost the opportunity to lay the foundations of democracy. He asked some critical questions. Why was this presidential election annulled? When the two parties at the various collection centers had jointly signed and agreed on the process, was it that it was rigged? Was it that the conduct was shoddy? You know, but again, if you go through the book, which IBB just validated by his own account of how he had to run for his life in order to allow what happened, you will discover that there was this rogue elements, both civilian and military, who were bent on truncating this process. In fact, they had, from Nwosu's account, wanted to stop the process even by the 11th of June, before even the 12th. So it was something Nigerians didn't quite anticipate. And we are yet to still recover from that process, because after that, we've never had anything near trying to conduct a credible election in Nigeria.
And clearly, one would remember Nwosu's voice ringing through Radio Nigeria at that time, because if I remember, by 1993, I'm not sure you had the pleasure of having other radio houses as rampantly as we have them now. It was just Radio Nigeria or NTA. His voice was unmistakably deep and clear as he made announcements and really argued his points. And one of the things that stood out is that, I mean, I had a guest yesterday and we spoke about this. He referenced Abacha a lot in a lot of the interviews he granted, even after leaving office, that he was harassed a lot by General Abacha. But then Babangida was president, and Babangida writes a book saying he was afraid of Abacha. So this is rather funny. And knowing what we know now, it was just a question of Abacha wanted to be head of state. And that's why we couldn't have June 12th election. We couldn't allow it to go on, because if Abiola is sworn in, it will mean that he will wait. And if he had to wait, then he might never get to his turn. They were passing the torch from one military guy to the other, and he kept arguing, it got to my turn, he wanted to do a transition program. But Nwosu stood his ground that the laws were there, the decree you people made in your military council was there, so why do you want to truncate the process, allow it to go on? After the election, he still was not allowed to declare the whole thing and to complete the process. I mean, just help us imagine, because you were in the labor movement at that time, and the kind of things you saw, and you've told some of these stories on radio sometimes. Give us a sense of what it's like having to have a brush with the military, especially in the 80s and 90s.
Well, Alex, I think this is just about human nature. I do not think it's just about this election. It is something, if you look through history, there will always be a Brutus. There will always be a Judas. There will always, in fact, if you follow the Nigerian situation, you will discover that the Abacha factor was always reoccurring. If you go through Gowon, it was a Murtala. If you go through Buhari, it was an IBB. So if you talk about IBB, it was Abacha. And I'm sure if Abacha had lived on, you could have still have been somebody. But I think what had happened is that the military, given the first failed coup, that no matter how we try to describe it in relation to subsequent coup, you know, if we were to use a scale of our now saying, how do we begin to judge? How do we begin to? We can, in retrospect now, describe the Nzogo's coup as nationalistic in quotes, given even the revelation in Babangida's book that that coup was not an Igbo coup. Because what happened was that after that coup, the subsequent coup that came up were now based on either tribe or a group of military people thinking that they have to have their way, and they will just raise issues around misgovernance, issues about corruption, issues of high-handedness. And you will be shocked that at that point they wouldn't be talking about the civilian government. It will still be about the military. So I agree with you that after the Civil War, it was as if there was this sense or this spark that is not reaching those who felt that part of the spoil of the victory is that they must have a bite, you know, from that big cake, which is just that office. Because you will discover that in that process, even those who didn't quite make it to the point of being head of state, you will discover that they were also very clearly marked and identified. And that's how you will hear about certain categories, that this set is so and so general's boys, you know, and at every given time, they will get the plumb of the distribution in terms of choices of posting, contracts, and what have you. But in this particular situation, it also shows to the level human craving and greed can always dampen collective and national interest. Because after more than 8 years of Babangida and what Nigerians went through and the level of corruption associated, one would have felt that whoever was part of that National Defense Council, you know, National Defense and Security Council, that was what the time, or how it was described, which is their own Supreme Military Council. Whoever was part of that would have been okay and had allowed a free transition. More so, given that at the time this election came, it was not as if the Babangida administration just announced a date and the National Electoral Commission proceeded to conduct. You will discover that there were changes. And at a point, it became even an issue that dominated not just labor, but civil society. That was the process that led to our constituting what we called labor joint trade union civil society combination or collaboration. So that was what happened. We felt that we needed a transition. We needed a more democratic government. We needed inclusion. But again, if you recall, that particular process took, as it were, or if we now recall, it was as if those who also sabotaged it didn't believe that it will get to that level. Because like I already pointed out, the local government's election has been conducted. The states have been set up. We had the state assemblies. We have the governors already in situ. Then we have the National Assembly that have been conducted.
And the Senate President was in place.
Exactly. So where were they? That's the question. In retrospect, you will now ask yourself, were they just planning to, stage a coup, or were they sleeping? Because nothing stopped them to have stopped even at the point where the local government election was to be conducted. For them to have allowed that process. And that's why I made the point that the impact in terms of the degrading of electoral institution integrity and trust which Nigerians had, I don't know how long it will take to recover, because what we now see is that there is no process, there is nothing INEC will do, that is the electoral empire, because tomorrow they may also seek to change the name. There's nothing they will do to be able to restore the confidence of Nigerians. Even when they do their best, there will always be this residual feeling that if June 12 was not allowed, which other election in Nigeria that can be that credible? So it becomes also a kind of a burden for us that June 12 will continue to remain, the signpost with which every other election in Nigeria can be assessed. And we will never get it that right, to that point. Because if you recall, one thing that election did was that it also ignored what we will call primordial tendencies of religion, of tribe, and what have you. Nigerians didn't even remember that the ticket then was also Muslim ticket. They didn't. And if you check what happened in Kano, Tofa even lost in Kano. So what that election also portrayed was that once a candidate, the people accept their march, that religion or tribe takes a very, very narrow or more than thought. In fact, nobody will even think about it. Our Abiola was not considered because he was a Muslim. King Gibe was seen more as an intellectual, an ambassador who has paid his due. It's only recently that this issue of religion will always come to play a role. So these are the things, if we now consider, and if we can regain it, but I am sure if that election had brought in Abiola and that we have remained on that trajectory, Nigeria will not be as we are, as pathetic as, and when citizens are mobilized, when citizens are made to believe that the system works, they contribute more, they become patriotic, they become productive, and they will begin to give to the system and also defend the virtues for which they are citizens. But after that election, we became more divisive, self-centeredness took no longer think about the national interest. What is dominant today, even the National Assembly, the only time we also came close to this in terms of the structure, if you talk about the method of option A4, was also when the issue of Obasanjo's third term came before the National Assembly. If voice votes was allowed, I don't think that would have been defeated. But Ken Nnamani was that courageous, and he knew that Nigerians were also watching. The political class was watching, everybody was expectant, So they decided first, he asked senators to return to their constituents to make consultation with their constituents and return. So when they came on a live TV, everybody was expected now to report back what was the consultation. And you saw what happened. I think that was what option A also delivered, because people were saying, okay, let us see how, after we have lined up and counted, along the symbol of the party we want to vote for, let us now see how anybody can distort or manipulate the process. And that is exactly what we have not even been able to do with technology. So at times, in trying to embrace modernity, we may also begin to try those basic methods that are pure traditional. It may at well work, because if you look at our experiment with technology, whether it is today's social media, you discover that it has been deployed more to disinformation, things that divide us, sentiment building, and what have you. When you talked about Radio Nigeria, that was when anything you hear on radio is fact, And if you also cast your mind back, the press then were more altruistic. I think the editorial process was also a bit rigid. It's not just putting in anything to be aired. But again, like I pointed out earlier, Nwosu came with the backdrop that people were doubted. People doubted that the electoral umpire was going to deliver. And there was no day before that election NEC and Nwosu was not in news for the negative fact that they did not believe that the NEC was going to conduct a free and fair election. So when the thing came, everybody was saying, let us see what will happen. And I sympathize with him, because before that period, a day before that annulment, Nwosu had an encounter whereby he was even slapped by a military officer. I don't know how many Nigerians knew about this. And do you recall that the paper with which Ndoka, I think Ndoka Irabo, gave to the press to announce the annulment, it was not signed by anybody. There was no identification on that piece of paper identifying from what office it came. But it was carried by the press. And that was what brought us at this level. So I don't want now to begin to talk about whether he should be remembered or not. But what is important is that we lost a whole lot of trying to, for the first time, build an institution that will be strong, that will be driven by mandate, that if you hear about an INEC officer, he will not only earn respect, he will be celebrated because people will be telling you, don't joke with these INEC people. That was what we lost. It was not just that Nwosu conducted the election and it was annulled. We lost a process that would have changed the Nigerian democratic process and would have affected the party system. Because if that election had been upheld, this idea of imposition of candidate would have been a thing of the past. Because what it means is that under a multi-party system, that any party that decide to field an unpopular candidate, just like the issue of TOFA, will definitely not make it. So it would have been an opportunity for credible candidates, for people of integrity, you know, because one thing leads to another. Once you are sure that the electoral umpire will carry out the dictates of the people, what it means is that party will begin to even invite people to flag their own flag. But because of what has happened, now parties will always do what they want to do. And the recent cliche, from what we hear, is that when election is coming, people will say, if you are not satisfied, you go to court. You know, so you know how that now has affected even the judiciary, such that the judiciary is not only overwhelmed, but it is now difficult, citizens tracking which judgment of the judiciary is even based on the law, and which one was not bought as a result of those who have bigger pulse. So it's a hell of distortion. That process degraded a lot of things for us, and it is only wise that having recognized the winner of that election by the man who presided over the annulment, no matter the circumstances, that is IPP, you know, then recognize the vice president, which is Gigingibe, by giving him the second highest honor, a commander of order of the Niger. Abiola posthumously is commander of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. You know, a national award for Nwosu wouldn't just be enough. You know, one of the things, and thank God that even INEC are also in the forefront of that Nwosu ought to be mortalized. You know, if INEC office is named after him, and maybe a center of learning, you know, not just the one family starts, you know, instituting a democratic center of learning using Nwosu's principle as a political scientist, you know, it will go a long way to also encourage public officers that standing by what is right courageously and playing by the rule has also its own reward, which usually will outlast any material or temporal gain people can derive by compromising or pursuing personal preferences.
I mean, it's interesting that you've mentioned possible ways he can be honored. One is to name the INEC headquarters in Abuja, Sir Humphrey Nwosu House, just like we have with some major structures already bearing the names of icons. In the police, it's Louis Edet House. And in your own area, the labor movement is Pa Imodu. I think that's the name of the labor house. Pa Imodu, Michael Imodu. Yeah, the labor house is named after him. So it will be fitting to have Professor Humphrey Nwosu's name hanging right at the top of the INEC headquarters in Abuja. But then there was an incident at the Senate today. I mean, it's possibly nothing, but Senator Abaribe wanted to push for the recognition of an immortalization of Professor Humphrey Nwosu. I mean, there were technicalities they said he needs to meet, but he felt sad about it and he walked out of the sitting at that time. I don't know, I'm sure you must have seen that story already. What does this say? If you are from this part of the country, it sounds cliche that when it comes to honoring someone from southeastern extraction, it looks like there is some kind of clay feet, there is some slow motion. There must be some technicality that will arise. Is there a problem with the process of pursuing it, or is there a sense that this is not just what they are thinking? In this age and time, everyone talks about June 12th, and they conveniently leave out the name of Professor Humphrey Nwosu, the man who insisted the elections would hold, and the man who insisted the results will be announced. Why is it convenient for him to be left out, especially in the biggest discourse about June 12th?
Well, Alex, I made this point that some of the things that is confronting us is not just about, it's more of the human nature. I am not one that is given to believing on this tribal thing, that people are excluded because of where they are from. It may be, it may be perception, but given the experiences of life, you will discover that the Senate as presently constituted, if there is an unwritten agreement now that every other Senate, assuming Akpabio goes now, that the next senator will come from South-South, you will discover that that is also from where he will be getting a kind of banana peel. We had it now when it was agreed within the political circle that the Southeast to produce the Senate president. Didn't you know the number of senators that came from this point? We had Chuba Kadibo, we had Adolphus Nwabara, we had Ivan, we had Ken Naman. But when it was torn off, I think North Central, you saw how David Mark served out his tema, Saraki, but for the fact that his act was considered anti-party, he would have gone on to even have 8 years. So this idea of the Southeast, the question also can be put this way: what is it that we've done in the Southeast to be able to celebrate Humphrey Nwosu? Let's leave this national thing, because you will discover that Martin Luther King, the struggle he took before a day was set aside for him in America as a public holiday, even when everybody appreciated his non-violent approach to political struggle. So this issue is not about where one is coming from. If you look at today, the structure of president, you will also discover that those who are also hitting hard on the president are just not from other zones. But the point I'm making is, if the point is that Abaribe needed to comply with some technical formalities, I don't think that is something anybody should begin to. But I would have even had thought that UNN, where Nwosu also made his stint, we should have been able, what is enduring is how do you deliver the right consciousness for people. That the police headquarters is named after Edet, or Labour House named after Nwosu. What changes has it brought? Do we have better labor leaders today that can be called disciples of Nwosu? Do we have better police officers that can be couched in the frame with which Edet and his team worked? But I would have thought that the best anybody can do to immortalize is that a present consciousness of what we are celebrating in terms of value ought to be instituted, you know, so that if we are talking, we will now say that this line of discipline, if it's political science, if it's electoral reform, that these are what the impact of Nwosu brought about. And the young people, it could be part of civic education. Because I can tell you, aside from the way we are discussing it, and that he is going to be buried on Friday, not many people, Nwosu is just discussed as any other thing. In fact, when I was discussing with somebody, that was last week on this issue, you know, not many people remember that actually that local government election had been conducted, states had been conducted, National Assembly. People just thought it was standalone election, whether as if we were going to elect a dictator that was going to be a president, you know. So I will prefer that kind of immortalization that will be able, after a decade of 1, 2, 3, we can now say these are the lessons we have learned as a result of that mistake. Now, if you look at the annulment of June 12th, you know, the only point we try to agonize about is at the point that election was annulled. But we are having worse situations. The manner elections are rigged. Is it not in this country now we have somebody who was a former Senate president who had contested the election to be president? At the point nomination and primaries had been concluded, the election conducted in a particular political party, and having lost the presidency to flag the flag of his party, the man still returned, went to court, and the court restored him as the candidate. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, but we need to know what is the ratio. How was that decision? How was it arrived at? Because without this knowledge, in fact, let me tell you, the difference between a developed society and one that is underdeveloped is the level of consciousness and civic knowledge. There's nothing. In the introduction of native administration in Nigeria, the policy documents in trying to differentiate Nigeria and Britain, why was it that it's not working? They didn't introduce it in Britain. The thing, the explanatory was that in Britain, the citizens are already aware. And awareness is not just by education. Through newspaper readership, listening to radio, information engagement, you know, being able to make contact with governmental institutions and personalities. Then the question was asked, how about Nigeria? And they said, no, you need now to administer the people in order to lead them to the law. But in Britain, the people are already aware 100 million will be eligible voters. You will find that less than 20 million, if it's that number, vote. And less than 10 million will now elect a president. Where is the legitimacy? So the level of consciousness, if you looked at what happened during the last American election, no matter how you try to interpret it, you will see a resurgence of certain consciousness, those who believe they needed to reclaim America. That's the kind of consciousness. It's not enough to talk about rigging. or whether when people talk about INEC, they just talk about the chairman. But the man who is sent to your polling booth is one of you. So if we don't have the consciousness that will make the likes of, that will repeat the kind of what we are celebrating Humphrey for. Because what it means is that at the point that the election was annulled through the court process, you know, you will discover that every attempt was made to stop Humphrey. And he refused. He was ready to lay his life. We saw a similar thing in the last election, gubernatorial election in Abia. So what I'm saying is that we must begin as citizens to develop that consciousness that will secure for us that which will deliver common good. You know, to be able to just give up, this thing is not working. It's just playing to deepen what has enslaved us, what has made the system not work, and it has become worse on social media. Somebody's right will be violated. He will post it on social media and be saying, keep circulating, so that the authority will hear it. Instead of taking positive steps to go and defend his right, they will say, keep circulating until the authority that is in charge. So how do you advance society in abstract when what you are talking about is right infringement? I do not think that even the way we are approaching democracy is right. Every day you see people who don't even know what democracy is all about, chopping out videos and posting and educating people on something they don't even understand. Some of them has never even attended their village meetings, not to talk of community. Some of them don't even engage their House of Assembly members. They don't even know who is representing them, but they will be talking about Abuja and the president and their rights. They will be in a vehicle. The police will stop the man carrying them, and they will ask all of them to move down, and they will just move away and stand by the roadside. Instead of insisting, no, what has this man done? Because once citizens are agitated, in fact, let me tell you, a perilous peace is better than a peaceful slave environment. Perilous freedom, a freedom that comes with danger, is far more better. And that is why when people make reference today, they will say, comrade, when you guys were in labor, you people left. And no. Then it was even more, we were confronting the military, but we were just not confronting them for confronting sake. We were engaged, we were determined, we were convinced that Nigeria needed a change and we needed to allow democracy. But in retrospect, we now have a mental climate where people expect others for things to just happen. They will say, these politicians, you know, and you will see somebody say, I will never vote again. You will say, I'm not interested in political party. You know, so how do you now build the system? How do you celebrate the likes of Humphrey, who would have lost his life trying to deliver to you a democratic election? So I think these are the areas I will want us to focus more. If they name a building after him, good. If they give a national honor. But for me, I celebrate him from the point of courage. I celebrate him for deferring the military. I celebrate him for taking a slap for us. And I celebrate him, he remained to be vindicated. Because if you have read his book, all he said is just what Babangida came to amplify. And he's taller in death than he was when he was alive.
I mean, those are very brilliant ways to describe a man who really oversaw an election Nigerians still celebrate till today. And as he goes home on Friday, I'm sure that you asked a question, very important question. What has been done in his honor in Southeast Nigeria? And I'm scanning through my head, and I can't find any. And then one can also naturally say, maybe you should have a Professor Humphrey Nwosu, a democratic center or something. I mean, I think that's the area you're leaning to. Something that
Exactly.
can give birth to political soft power, you know, training the next generation of political strategists and political thinkers. But then these are ideas, and I've not seen any grand movement from any Southeast governor regarding Humphrey Nwosu. He was a commissioner in the old Anambra state. I think he was commissioner for local government in Meko Merua's government. So,
Yes.
so if you have the former Ebonyi state, Enugu state, and Anambra state coming together, that's the jurisdiction. He also served as a commissioner. And we haven't seen enough movement. Is this, I mean, does that also lay credence to the point you were making? What has the governors of the Southeast region done instead of arguing whether Abaribe's motion was taken?
Well, Alex, you know, I've been consistent on this issue of marginality. You know, this saying in Igbo, no onya ajolo, ada ajụ onwe ya. You know, in fact, what has made the Jews unique is that from the days of Exodus, it's like they said never again. Even when we knew that it had happened, even before 1948, when the state of Israel was now created, talking now about the Holocaust, but you will see a people that is determined. It's not just about whether something has been done for Humphrey. I am saying, what are even the lessons from the Civil War? What is it that we look back today, we will say, this is one point that the Igbos are celebrating as a result of what we went through as a result of the Civil War. All we have to do is to talk about marginalization, how we were given 20 pounds. But if you look at it today in Nigeria, the Igbos are not the poorest. When people talk about poverty, the level of poverty you'll find even in enclaves, those who have controlled political power and resources of the country. You can't find it in Southeast. But I think what has happened to us is that that spirit with which the Igbos announced themselves in Nigeria, which was consummated under the Igbo Union of the Zikobi era, is no more there. Even in our small communities, the center no longer holds. When you talk about Ohaneze today, you talk about Ohaneze that takes instruction from electoral, political actors. You know, when I had a role, I played a role in Ohaneze, I was there. In fact, the distance I had was when I was elected into the National Trade Union. And Chukwumerije said, no, you have to now play from the background so people don't begin to misrepresent. You know, when you do something, they will say, now you brought Igbo agenda. But then we had an Ohaneze that was not subservient to the state government. That was when late Mwabeze was general secretary, you know. So today, why is it that our politics, our orientation is that not so some ways ago? Because if we had allowed a melting standard, there are values that can be perpetuated without partisan inclination. If you look at the introduction, how the missionary brought the Christian religion, you will discover that the first time they came, their contact with adults, who they referred to as pagans, wasn't yielding fruit. So what they did was to begin to introduce missionary schools and started catching them young. And along the line, they felt, okay, even if you had these missionaries that are now trained you know, to be catechist and what have you. Would they still return to marry from the pagans? They decided to create school for women. You know, that was how I think Waddell, and if you mention them, women training centers and what have you. Even what the Igbos are known for, Igbo Asafia, Igbo Odibo, it is gone. There's nothing now we celebrate. So there are things we can start on our own, and our language is unique, that we don't even need to pronounce what we have to do. But they usually will say that with which a man is known is usually in his heart. And we pray that that which is in his heart must be that for collective good. When we talk about the exploits of Biafra in terms of how we survive the world technologically, where has it been replicated? People will talk about Proda, and they will say Nigerian did not even allow Proda to continue. All the scientific, now the universities, polytechnics we have in Southeast that are technologically oriented, what do they have to show? Has anybody come to say, no, don't do this? I find myself today in a University of Agriculture playing a role. There is even no presence within that is, the communities where the university is situated have no benefit from the University of Agriculture. And it's in Igbo land, though, the heart of Igbo, Abia, Umudike. So the point I'm saying is that this idea of always trying to push, now you will discover that the narrative now will be, they don't want to recognize Nwosu, that Abaribe wanted to. No, I do not believe that we should be playing. There is nowhere in the world, go and look at the history, where national honors to civilians have been that simple. The only way you find it very easy is within the military. That is where you find easy, because I think there is how it is cultivated and it is defined. If you recall, when the University of Lagos was to be named after Abiola, was it accepted? Was it other people from other zone that rejected it? So this idea of a little issue, we want now to bring in the sentiment of Ndigo. That is part of why we are not making progress. I just gave you an example. I think it was under Jonathan. When University of Lagos was to be renamed Abiola, was it did the West accept it? They rejected it. Some even went to court. So we must be careful how this sense of marginalization and how it has affected us and how we have allowed it not to even do our own bit. When we talk about what we need to do today, we are almost entering the farming season. I can tell you there is no agricultural program by any local government for any community in the Southeast.
All right. I don't know whether you can hear me, comrade. I think I lost connection with you for a bit. You couldn't hear me for a while, but yes. I was just trying to remind you that we are totally out of time, but that's absolutely fine. And I'm always in debt of thanking you for your analysis anytime you are my guest on the Eastern Eye. And for today, I thank you so much for taking us down memory lane. Thank you for your insights and perspectives on the Eastern Eye tonight. All right, okay, they still cannot hear me, apparently, but that's the Eastern Eye for tonight. Well, thank you so much, Comrade Fidelis Ede, former Vice President of NLC, Executive Director, Service Accord Initiative. Thank you so much. And of course, IFIA TV will be live at the burial of Professor Humphrey Nwosu, live from Ajali, Orumba North. And you'll be joining us for the funeral service and then the burial. We'll be bringing you live transmission of that event.